Hey everybody, welcome to day 4 of the Amonkhet set review on the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and today we're going to take a look at every single red card in Amonkhet. This of course is a limited set review, don't need to go over the rest of the disclaimers, so we're going to jump right on in to the first card. Up first is On-Crop Crasher. On-Crop Crasher is hard to say. On-Crop Crasher is 2 and a red for a creature Minotaur Warrior at uncommon. It's a 3/2 with haste. You may exert On-Crop Crasher as it attacks. When you do, target creature can't block this turn. We haven't seen too much exert yet because it does primarily live in red, so we'll see a lot today. Goblin Heel Cutter was great, which was kind of this card. It was a 3/2 with dash that had this ability. Rebel Wheelsmith was solid. We just saw that in Kaladesh block. This is slightly less so in that you only get to do the effect every other turn. Still an absolute solid curve filler at 3 and a game ender later in the match. It just seems like an auto include in every single red deck and a decently high pick. I'm pretty happy giving this a B-. Slightly weak on the 2 toughness, but doesn't matter when you're just winning a game. Battlefield Scavenger is up next. Battlefield Scavenger is 1 and a red for a creature Jackal Rogue at uncommon. It's a 2/2. You may exert Battlefield Scavenger as it attacks. Whenever you exert a creature, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Now this is kind of cool, and we'll see another example of this in red. A card that exerts and doesn't do anything, but it does something whenever any creature exerts, including itself. So its exert technically does do something. It's really a bear with an upside. It's a 2/2 for 2, and you get to rummage when you exert it. Maybe even rummage if you exert with some other creature. It's kind of nice. This probably isn't a high pick, but it's a solid mid-pack pick for me, and basically 100% playable in every deck. At worst, it's a 2/2 for 2, which, is probably slightly worse in red. They prefer to up the power a little bit, but yeah, totally fine. C+ for me. Bear with an upside. Blazing Volley is up next. Blazing Volley is a single red mana for a sorcery at common. Blazing Volley deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. This is not very good. At sorcery speed, this is quite bad, frankly. We saw Electrickery way back in Return to Ravnica, which was 1 and a red to do this, ignoring the other ability of it. This for a single red mana, but at sorcery speed, I'm just not main decking this. And I can see an extraordinarily tiny number of places that I would side it in. Basically, if your opponent is playing, 7 copies of Start to Finish, and they're making 1/1 warriors, maybe, I guess? But a lot of the tokens being made are 2/2s or X2s and higher. I just don't see a place for this. D-. I'm not going to bother with this. Bloodlust Insider is up next. Bloodlust Insider is a single red mana for a creature human warrior at common. It's a 1/1. Tap it. Target creature gains haste until end of turn. 1/1s for 1 need to be real special, and this is not real special. Giving basically each creature you play haste is nice enough, but this needs to be your turn 1 play. This gets worse and worse and worse and worse the later the game goes. I'm going to cut this real liberally. C-. Bloodrage Brawler is up next. Bloodrage Brawler is 1 and a red for a creature Minotaur Warrior at uncommon. It's a 4/3, and when Bloodrage Brawler enters the battlefield, discard a card. If you can't, oh well, who cares? Not me, and certainly not Bloodrage Brawler. Yeah, this is real pushed. This is real good. This is a 4/3 for 2 that has a quote-unquote downside of discarding a card in a color that really wants to have 1 or fewer cards in hand, in a set that has all kinds of graveyard mechanics, and if you don't have any cards left in hand, you don't have to. They're not going to sacrifice the creature or anything. This is super pushed. It's not quite Train level. It's definitely not Tusker level. I actually don't even think it's Scrapper Champion level. I think it's pushed for this set, and it's pushed for Magic historically, but it doesn't quite compare to the ridiculousness of Aether Revolt on commons. Plus, there's more than enough removal in the set, as we'll see even more of in this color, that I'm not overly threatened by this. However, this is incredible on turn 2. On turn 2, this is a 4/3. This is going to attack probably unimpeded on turn 3 on a lot of board states, unless your opponent had both a 1 and a 2 drop, or a 2 and a solid 3 drop. Luckily, this does drop off a little bit later in the game. The later it gets, it just becomes a cheap summit prowler, which is fine. Nobody's going to be sad they had to pay 2 mana for a 4/3 on turn 7. It's just not going to be as impactful. So while pushed, I think it gets less and less disgusting as it gets away from turn 2. But that turn 2 play, dear God, this is going to hurt. I'm at B on this, a solid straight up B, because that downside is absolutely going to be a huge amount of the time just an upside. So solid B on this, relatively high pick, Blood Rage Brawler. However, I don't think it's unbeatable or format warping or anything like that, so I'm not too afraid of it. Brute Strength is a reprint from Oath of the Gatewatch back again, 1 and a red for an instant at common. Target creature gets +3/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. It was fine enough in Oath of the Gatewatch, and it'll be fine enough here. It's similar to Built to Smash in Kaladesh. It costs twice as much, but it gives trample every single time. It doesn't just have to be an artifact creature, and it doesn't have to be an attacking creature. This is just all around a solid combat trick, extraordinarily playable in an aggressive red deck. The trample and +3 is going to get through way more damage than your opponent ever expected. If you're not planning on attacking every single turn, and if you're not planning on being done by turn 5 or turn 6, you might not consider playing this, but in an aggro deck, this is just a super solid trick that can finish quite well. I'm pretty happy giving a straight up C. By Force is up next. By Force is X and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. Destroy X target artifacts. Nope, not even slightly designed for this set. You should never ever play this. This is for Kaladesh. This is for hating out in Standard. And who knows, maybe even Modern against Affinity or something like that. Pure 100% constructed sideboard. Absolutely no intention of playing this ever. F-. The red cartouche is up next. Cartouche of Zeal is a single red mana for an enchantment or a cartouche, a common enchant creature you control. When Cartouche of Zeal enters the battlefield, target creature can't block this turn. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has haste. Boy, I wish it was first strike. Yeah, this is my least favorite cartouche by far. Almost the entire impact of this aura is gone the turn after you play it. Haste auras historically are quite mediocre. The creature can't block effect is nice enough, but generally it's only good when you're getting it turn after turn after turn, like a Renegade Wheelsmith or an On-Crop Crasher. Yes, this card is basically Hammerhand from Magic 2015, but I don't remember Hammerhand being that great in Magic 2015. And, when it was because Magic 2015 was a really simple set. There wasn't much going on. This is just not the set for a Hammerhand. I don't think this is going to be in any way as good as Hammerhand was, and I still don't think Hammerhand was that great. So I'm on D- on this. I'm just not playing Cartouche of Zeal. I think it's rather mediocre. Combat Celebrant is up next. Combat Celebrant is 2 and a red for a creature human warrior at Mythic. It's a 4/1. If Combat Celebrant hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks. When you do, untap all of the creatures you control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. This seems really, really weak. This dies way too much. Getting a single extra combat phase likely isn't going to be enough, especially when your opponent knows a turn early that this is going to be coming. This really needs some sort of ability attacked onto it for survivability. It needs first strike or 2 toughness or something. This just feels trappy to me. I'm going to start really low on this, and I'm going to pass it for an awful lot of things. I'll put it at a C+, because, if you do get that second combat step, it's good, but boy, this feels like a waste of a Mythic slot, but I have a feeling that you can't do additional combat phases at lower than Mythic due to complexity reasons. Consuming Fervor is up next. It's a single red mana for an enchantment aura at uncommon. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3 and has, at the beginning of your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on this creature. This is a functional reprint of Unstable Mutation from, I believe, Revised, except there it was a single blue mana for everything that this card says. Yeah, this is interesting, and of course it has some direct synergies with black and green, where -1/-1 counters matter, and Unstable Mutation is one of my favorite cards from way back in 96 or so when I first started playing. That being said, it's not great by any means. It's very much an all-in aggro card, which makes significantly more sense with it being in red than it ever did in blue. You will lose to this card. I will lose to this card, just like, you lose to Madcap Skills. Is it right to play this card? I'm not certain. If you have a critical mass of evasive targets, flyers, first strikers, tramplers, etc., then probably yes. If your plan's to get through on the ground without evasion, I think you might need to take a pass on this. Pick-wise, I think this is going to filter through the pack for a good long while, so you're going to be able to get it mid-pack or even later. But yeah, if you're hyper aggro, if you've got the evasion, maybe if you've got one of the colors paired up with red that cares about -1/-1 counters, you might play it a little bit higher. But I'm going to start it at a middle-of-the-road C. Deem Worthy is up next. Deem Worthy is 4 and a red for an instant uncommon. Deem Worthy deals 7 damage to target creature. Cycling, 3 and a red. When you cycle Deem Worthy, you may have it deal 2 damage to target creature. This is basically unconditional instant speed removal for 5, which we already saw in black and is totally fine. It's not ideal, no, but totally fine and highly pickable. You're not often going to cycle this, and again, limited resources said, oh, well, you're probably just going to always cycle this. I don't agree, but whatever. But when you have the chance to finish off a creature post-combat and draw a card, that's pretty darn cool. But the fact that this kills stuff that is bigger and more deadly most of the time is fantastic. It's not as high of a pick as something like Never to Return as far as removal goes, but it's still real good. I'm pretty happy with this at a B+. Desert Cerodon is up next. Desert Cerodon is 5 and a red for a creature beast at common. It's a 6/4 with cycling for a single red. Another card that I just don't care to ever play, and having cheap cycling doesn't really matter. Very few red decks ever want to play a 6-drop unless it's like an awesome dragon or something. A vanilla 6/4? No. Totally out on that. I don't care that it has cycling. I'm not actively going to play this ever. Sealed, desperate for a creature, maybe, but I'm never going out of my way for this. D+. Electrify is up next. Electrify is 3 and a red for an instant at common. Electrify deals 4 damage to target creature. More instant speed removal. I love it, I love it, I love it. 4 mana, instant speed, 4 damage. Very solid. Yeah, we used to have Lightning Bolt way back in the day and it cost 1, but that's not current time. And this is still just very solid for current time. It'll kill a very good number of things in the format and should be a relatively high pick. Not likely to ever be first pick, but pretty soon after that. Very happy with it. B-, I think, although I could even be talked up to a B. Yeah, it's just real good. Emberhorn Minotaur is 3 and a red for a creature Minotaur Warrior at common. It's a 4/3. You may exert Emberhorn Minotaur as it attacks. When you do, it gets +1/+1 and gains menace until end of turn. So Summit Prowler, which is 2 red for a 4/3, is a totally fine red creature. We saw it in Khans of Tarkir, Dragons of Tarkir, and we've seen similar stat cost ratios before. This one's an even easier to cast Summit Prowler because it's 3 and a red instead of 2 red. Every other turn getting to attack as a 5/4 menace is probably just the default plan, I would assume. This is just a fine near the top of the curve card in most linear red decks, and they'll love to have it. Just seems like a solid C+ to me. Flameblade Adept is up next. It's a single red mana for a creature Jackal Warrior at uncommon. It's a 1/2. It's got menace. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, Flameblade Adept gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Now here's a cycling payoff that I don't give the slightest damn about. This is real bad. 1/2 for 1 that sometimes will be a 2/2 menace, but frequently will be a 1/2. I just really don't care about this card. I think this is probably the worst cycling payoff we've seen. I'm not going to play this card really ever, so I'm at like a D+ on it, I think. It's just not for me. Fling is a fun reprint that I'm sure will make some people happy. It's 1 and a red for an instant at common, and as an additional cost to cast Fling, sacrifice a creature. Fling deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target creature or player, which is a really good part of Fling. We last saw Fling in Limited in Dark Ascension, another format that had an awful lot of graveyard interaction, and it wasn't great there. It was fine, but it didn't always make the cut. I expect the same thing to happen here. Hitting players is very nice, and obviously using this on an embalm creature or with recursion in hand or something like that, or getting some sort of additional value is very nice. It does an impersonation of Bone Splinters, sacking a creature to kill a creature, and it can even end the game as well. Being instant speed is quite nice as well. It dodges removal, which there is a fair bit of. Still, you need to know what you're doing in the draft and deck building, and it's not an auto include. I'd pick it mid-pack at best, and I'm just going to kind of give it a C. It is a decent card, and of course it pairs well with threaten effects, but there is, I believe, only one in the entire set. Yeah, I'm going to keep it at a C. It's a card that some people love, some people hate, some avoid it, some play it. I'm ever so slightly more on the avoid side, but solid C. Up next is a red Mythic, Glorious End. Glorious End is 2 and a red for an instant at Mythic. End the turn. That means you exile all spells and abilities that are currently on the stack. The player whose turn it is discards down to his or her maximum hand size, damage wears off, and this turn and until end of turn effects end. End the turn. At the beginning of your next end step, you lose the game. You just straight up lose. This is basically a fog that sometimes counters a spell maybe, that requires you to win the game next turn. The Minotaur in the art there, that's the new player learning why fog is a bad card. Don't play this. Do not play it. F. 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 Not an F is Glorybringer. Glorybringer is 3 red for a creature dragon at rare. It's a 4/4 flying haste. You may exert Glorybringer as it attacks. When you do, it deals 4 damage to target non-dragon creature on opponent controls. Guess what? There's not that many dragons in the set. A 4/4 flying haste for 5 is already totally playable and probably just shy of utter bomb territory, but tacking on an optional ability to most likely kill a creature at the expense of taking a turn off attacking with it seems really good and just a solid first pick. A-, probably just straight up A. Real good card here. Don't pass this. We've hit a big old vein of rares here. Harsh Mentor is 1 and a red for a creature human cleric at rare. It's a 2/2. Whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land on the battlefield, if it isn't a mana ability, Harsh Mentor deals 2 damage to that player. This is a bear with an upside, and it's kind of minimal at that, I think. If you get some incidental value out of this, cool, but I super would not count on it. I would just play it as a 2/2 for 2 and be happy. Activated abilities are basically anything that is cost : ability. Could be tap, do something, could be pay mana, do something. Mana abilities are formatted the same except they produce mana. There are some other weird things. I don't think they really come up in this set, though. Basically, you can't, ping them for tapping a land for mana or tapping a mana dork for mana, things like that. Yeah, I wouldn't super count on this. It's a bear with a minimal upside, C+. The red god is up next, Hazrat the Fervent. Hazrat the Fervent is 3 and a red for a legendary creature god at Mythic. She's a 5/4 indestructible with haste. Hazrat the Fervent can't attack or block unless you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, your heck bent. Pay 2 and a red and discard a card. Hazrat deals 2 damage to each opponent. Hazrat looks really, really good. This is just going to be a beating in some matchups where red deck curves out into this and attacks for 5 plus more, assuming there's going to be other creatures on the battlefield. Hazrat just seems really powerful, relatively easy to turn on by the time she comes down, and if you have to struggle to turn her on, you're shocking your opponent's face by paying mana and throwing away cards. I want to play this card. She looks fantastic. I think she's probably my second favorite of the gods, but they're all really close except for Kefnet, who's pretty mediocre. Anyways, solid A for Hazrat the Fervent. Hazrat's Favor is 2 and a red for an enchantment rare. We're still in this giant vein of rares. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may have target creature you control get +2/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. If you do, sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. I'm not a super big fan of these sort of hyper-aggressive enchantments. I was very much in the camp of Blood Mist is bad back during Shadows over Innistrad, and I think this is pretty mediocre as well. I'll lose to it, no doubt. But the effect is just so minimal, and to have to sacrifice the creature after, I feel like there's way too much that your opponent can just horribly screw up your plan with this. They chump block your creatures, and then very quickly you're just going to have nothing left. Tons of fun constructed stuff you can do with it, I'm sure, but in Limited, I'm out. D-. Heart Piercer Manticore is our last rare for at least a little bit anyways. 2 red for a creature Manticore at rare. It's a 4/3. When Heart Piercer Manticore enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, Heart Piercer Manticore deals damage equal to that creature's power to target creature or player. It has Fling built in, and it has Embalm for 5 and a red. You can bring it back one more time to fling something else at your opponent. Yeah. Heart Piercer Manticore looks really good. Again, it's a Summit Prowler, 2 red for a 4/3, which is totally fine at worst. And of course, at best, it just straight up kills your opponent out of utterly nowhere. Obviously, this will fall in the middle, being used to damage a player or kill a creature or something like that more frequently. But the fact that it gets to come back and do it again is just really nice. This just seems like a card that's going to come out of nowhere, and I'd happily first pick it. It's kind of slightly shy of being like game warping bomb, so I'm going to keep it at an A- and not go any higher, but it's a solid A- first pick at that. All right, let's get back to commons with pretty mediocre one. Hyena pack, 2 red for a creature Hyena at common. It's 2 red, it must be a 4/3, right? No, it's a 3/4. For some reason, 3/4s are much worse than 4/3s in your average red deck. This is basically Prakata Club Security that's slightly harder to cast because it's 2 red instead of 3 and a black. And that's just too much. I'm going to play this real rarely. It's a D+. If I'm desperate, I guess you could push it into C+ category, but this is real mediocre. Limits of Solidarity is up next. Limits of Solidarity is 3 and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. On-tap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. Cycling for 2 generic mana. So it's the threaten effect of the set. Yawn, we see these every set, and usually with the set's mechanics stapled on. So here's cycling, stapled on. These effects just so rarely are worth it to me unless there's like a dedicated steal your guys and sack them deck. Now this set does have Fling, but it's just really not my style to build this deck. I certainly lose to it, but I feel like I beat it, 9 times and then I lose to it once. I don't really advise playing this threaten effect. Even though it has cycling on it, it's just not something that I'm going to play. I'll drop it to a C- because of the cycling, but I'm not going to play this very much. Magma Spray is up next. It's a single red mana for an instant at common. It's a reprint from somewhere that I can't remember. Magma Spray deals 2 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Taking quote or player away from shock does make this a little bit worse, but it makes up for it by exiling the creature in a set full of Embalm and Graveyard Recursion and zombies and etc. So fair trade by my count. Ultimately, this will likely be just as decent as Shock was in this format, despite the slight loss in reachability. I'm at B- on Magma Spray. I'll pick it pretty highly. Manticore of the Gauntlet is up next. 4 and a red for a creature Manticore at common. It's a 5/4. When Manticore of the Gauntlet enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature you control. Manticore of the Gauntlet deals 3 damage to target opponent. Why is this black-green creature in red? Very strange bleeding of set mechanics here. 5 may ask a slight bit much of the average red deck, but 3 free damage to the opponent attached to either a 4/3 or a 5/4 is fine. Maybe even decent on the 5/4 end. It's not an amazing card. I'd obviously strongly prefer if it hit creatures, but, if a red deck's looking for a top end, here's an okay topper. Give it kind of a C+. But, it's not something to super go out of your way for. Minotaur Sure Shot is up next. Minotaur Sure Shot is 2 and a red for a creature Minotaur Archer at common. It's 2/3 with reach, and you can pay 1 and a red to give Minotaur Sure Shot +1/+0 until end of turn. For some reason, it has expensive garbage fire breathing. Red doesn't often get reach, so that's kind of cool to see. But it probably should just live in your sideboard until you see that you're up against flyers, and then bring it in game 2. 2/3 just is not a set of red stats. Expensive fire breathing is really bad. Just leave this out of your main deck. Keep it in the sideboard. Straight D. Nefkrop Tangler is up next. Nefkrop Tangler is 1 and a red for a creature human warrior. It's a 2/1 at common. It's got trample. You may exert Nefkrop Tangler as it attacks. When you do, it gets +1/+2 until end of turn. This is a piker, the first of at least 1 or 2 pikers that we'll see. Pikers aren't great. Pikers are 2/1s for 2 in red generally. But this one can become a 3/3 maybe every other turn, and that's not too bad. You know, the first turn, maybe you get in with it for 2, and then the next turn, you didn't exert it the first turn, and the next turn you can get in for 3. Seems like a good play, and I think the exert or not exert sort of mini game in this set is going to be really interesting. But yeah, you know, it still dies to a single -1/-1 counter whenever it's not, you know, attacked and exerted. I won't go any higher than a C on it, but it is better than your average piker. Nimbleblade Kenra is up next. Nimbleblade Kenra is 1 and a red for a creature Jackal Warrior at common. It's a 1/3 prowess. Meh. Great big giant meh. We had this card in one of the Tarkir sets called Jeskai's Student. It was 1 and a white for exactly this card, and it was pretty mediocre. Prowess, I've ranted about this for years now. Don't get too pie in the sky about triggering this 4 times in a turn. You're going to be lucky if you ever trigger this 4 times in an entire game. On average, in limited, you're going to trigger this like a couple times, maybe, if you're lucky. 1/3s just are not what red wants to be doing. It's not really what many colors want to be doing. Totally out on this. Cut it very, very, very liberally. C- at absolute best. Pathmaker Initiate is our next piker. It's a 1 and a red. Creature human wizard at common for a 2/1. This one you can tap, and target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. This is actually basically, if you ignore the creature type, strictly better Goblin Tunneler, a card from Magic 2012. I believe it was actually in Conspiracy Take the Crown as well. This is still not any good. Goblin Tunneler wasn't really any good, and this isn't really any good either. It's a piker, so it dies very readily. Getting to get a 2x or a 1x in exchange for tapping a creature down, I'm not terribly impressed by this. I'm going to cut it very liberally. Also a C-. Pursue Glory is up next. Pursue Glory is 3 and a red for an instant at common. Attacking creatures get +2/+0 until end of turn. Cycling for 2 generic mana. So this is slightly more expensive Trumpet Blast, and it turns out that making Trumpet Blast cost 1 more feels really bad. I don't mind Trumpet Blast for 2 and a red, but 3 and a red? I started to feel a little bit bad about that. It's still fine though, you know, and the cycling is a really nice addition here, because if you do find yourself not quite getting into the Trumpet Blast territory, you can throw this away and try to get something off the top of your deck. It's not amazing, it's not something that you're going to spend a real pick on, but it's totally playable. Straight up C. Soul Scar Mage is a single red mana for a creature human wizard at rare. It's a 1/2 with prowess, and if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a creature an opponent controls, put that many -1/-1 counters on that creature instead. Basically, it gives all of your non-combat damage wither, which is interesting, but I'm just not buying this for limited. Constructed, sure, this is kind of a cool burn deck inclusion, because you can burn out a 4/4 that you normally couldn't kill with your shock or your 3-power burn and still weaken it pretty significantly. And then, later on in the game, kill it off, or maybe that stops it from attacking, etc. Cool constructed implications here. Limited, you're just not going to have enough burn spells for this to be amazing. And if you do, you have a lot of burn spells. Just play a good creature instead and win anyways. So I'm out on this. I think this is a D+. I think this is very constructed and not limited. Sweltering Suns is up next. Sweltering Suns is 1 red for a sorcery at rare. Sweltering Suns deals 3 damage to each creature, cycling for 3 generic mana. So it's Anger of the Gods, although I think Anger of the Gods exiled, I don't remember, with cycling 3 tacked onto it. This is totally fine, but like all effects like this, like Wraths, make sure you play it properly. Make sure that you are not flooding the board with your own creatures that are just going to die. Hold them back, play your bigger stuff, etc. Play into this, convince your opponent to overextend, and then get them. The cycling is really nice because if you draw this too late, or if you've already flooded the board and you don't want to blank the board, you can just throw this away and get another card. Still not a giant fan of this effect. I never really have been, but the cycling versatility is very nice, so I will settle at a B- on Sweltering Suns. Thresher Lizard is up next. Thresher Lizard is 2 and a red for a creature lizard at common. It's a 3/2. Thresher Lizard gets +1/+2 as long as you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand. As long as you're heckbent, this is a 4/4 for 3. A 3/2 for 3 is filler level. You know, that's totally fine. A red deck would play one of those and not feel too upset about it. Obviously, don't spend a real pick on it. But later in the game, when you start to get heckbent, it becomes a 4/4, and that's really nice. Red decks love 4/4s. They're the big beef. Wow, I can't believe I have a creature this big kind of card in most red decks compared to green. So I'm willing to go up to a C+ on this. Another reprint here, Tormenting Voice. Tormenting Voice is 1 and a red for a sorcery at common. As an additional cost to cast Tormenting Voice, discard a card. Draw 2 cards. It's kind of a strange include. You know, we just looked at a card, and a lot of cards in red want you to have very, very few cards in your hand. This discards a card, that's great, but then it replaces it with 2. Very strange. But, of course, it does work very well with other aspects of the set, like Aftermath and Embalm and Recursion. You get to throw away a card that you might just be able to bring right back. But yeah, anyways, Tormenting Voice is always fine enough, though I do often skip playing it, so it sits kind of at a C- for me. Still, it's a good way to fill up your hand a little bit when you start running out of gas, which is what red decks generally want, but maybe not quite as much in this set. So I am going to settle on a C- for Tormenting Voice. The red Trial is up next. Trial of Zeal is 2 and a red for an enchantment at uncommon. When Trial of Zeal enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. When a cartouche enters the battlefield under your control, return Trial of Zeal to its owner's hand. Yeah, Trial of Zeal looks real good. I think it's my favorite. I think the blue one's really good. But I like this one as well, because this one's just Lightning Bolt for 3 mana at sorcery speed, which is significantly worse than Lightning Bolt, yes, but it turns out that it takes an awful lot for me to not cast a Lightning Bolt. Yeah, I'll gladly play this every time. If I can get it back once, it becomes really good, but I'm also never really gonna play the red cartouche to get this back, or at least I don't think I am. But if I'm red-blue, I'll play all the blue cartouches. I'll play all the green cartouches, as we see tomorrow for sure. But yeah, this is just a solid, yet another piece of removal in this set, which makes me really happy. I'm at a B- on Trial of Zeal. I think it's real good. Trueheart Twins is up next. Trueheart Twins is 4 and a red for a creature Jackal Warrior at uncommon. It's a 4/4. You may exert Trueheart Twins as it attacks. Whenever you exert a creature, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So this is just like the Jackal that if I scroll up to the top of the list, I will see what name it is. It was Battlefield Scavenger. The exert doesn't do anything, but it looks at exert for every single creature. Basically, Trueheart Twins has Battle Cry when it attacks, which is a mechanic from Mirrodin Besieged block. And that's totally fine. It's slightly expensive for red, but a 4/4 Battle Cry is an amazing curve topper for red. If you've played, 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, 5-drop, attack, give your team +1/+0, and if you exert another creature +2/+0, or 3 creatures +3/+0, etc., this can just go off the rails. I'm pretty happy with this as a curve topper, and I think it's a pretty high mid-pack pick. I'm actually at a B- on Trueheart Twins. Obviously, you're going to want to, be a solidly aggressive red deck, but I think it's really good. B-. Violent Impact is up next. Violent Impact is 3 and a red for a sorcery at common. Destroy target artifact or land. Cycling for 2 generic mana. Nope. There's very few, if any, artifacts that I'd ever actively consider hating out in the format, and certainly never main decking this card for. I don't care that it has cycling, and of course land destruction is just not something that you even really consider. Yeah, pure sideboard D. Our final non-split red card of the set is Warfire Javelin Air. Warfire Javelin Air is 3 and a red for a creature Minotaur Warrior at uncommon. It's 2/3. When Warfire Javelin Air enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature an opponent controls, where X is the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. It took this long from Cryptic Serpent to get to the next instant and sorceries matter card. And that's why I just don't think that the deck actually exists in this format. They might be setting it up for hours, they might just be supplementing the cards that we got in Eldritch Moon for standard, but I don't think it exists here, so I don't think you're going to go deep on this. As it is, it's a 4 mana 2/3 that's probably going to maybe shock. If you're real lucky, it's got a lightning bolt attached to it, in which case it's pretty decent. But yeah, I'm not going to play this too regularly because I just don't trust having that many instant and sorceries in the graveyard at the time. So I'm at a C- on this. Maybe it turns out to be really good, but I just don't see it. C-. Finally, our split card for red is Insult to Injury. Insult is 2 and a red for a sorcery at rare. Damage can't be prevented this turn. If a source you control would deal damage this turn, it deals double damage instead. Injury is 2 and a red for a sorcery with Aftermath. Injury deals 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player. So you can pay 6 mana and cast the first half and then the second half and deal 4 damage to a creature and 4 damage to a player. That is a little bit much to ask at sorcery speed no less, but it could be fine. Ultimately, the first half feels kind of like a trumpet blast or something that you hope to go, haha, I win the game, except it's sorcery speed, which means your opponent knows they have to block. So you're either going to win the game because your opponent doesn't have anything to block with, in which case you're winning the game anyways, and if your opponent does block, you just wasted the front half of this spell and maybe traded with some creatures because it does not give them double strike. It just gives them double damage. Injury, on the other hand, is fine removal, so that's not too bad, but overall, I'm not super excited by Insult to Injury. I think it's C+, I think you'll play it, but I don't think it's something to, I don't think you open it and say, aha, I'm going red because I opened this card, so C+ for Insult to Injury. So that's going to wrap it up for the red cards. Let me know what you think of red. There are some really good cards in there. Heartpiercer Manticore has me quite excited, as well as a bunch of the sort of uncommon aggro cards. Let me know what you like about red, what you agree with, what you disagree with. Chat with yourselves in the comments down below, etc. As always, if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, that's not the order I usually say that in. You can find me at Twitter at the Mana Leek. That's Leek, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me at facebook.com/themanaleek, twitch.tv/themanaleek, or patreon.com/themanaleek if you want to become a backer there. As always, click that thumbs up button if you like the content. Click subscribe if you want to see more. Otherwise, if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, that's the order I say it in. Let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you all tomorrow for the green set review.